The room went quiet the moment the word, "Janitor," left my sister's mouth. Not a whisper. Not a breath. Just the clink of her wine glass against the rim of her plate. And the sound of my mother's fork dropping to porcelain. I didn't look at her, I looked at Michael. He was standing across the room, in his navy suit. Tailored, understated. The same calm face he wore every day since we met. The same steady eyes that helped me rebuild my life from rubble. But in that moment, under the chandeliers and curated centerpieces, my sister reduced him to a joke. To a title she thought she understood. A janitor. She said again, louder this time. Like it was the punchline to a story. "Tell me, Elena, did you meet him while he was mopping this place?" Some guests laughed. A few didn't know what to do. The band stopped playing. Michael didn't move. I felt my fingers curl around the napkin in my lap, linen against skin, knuckles white. Lily reached under the table and squeezed my hand. I knew this was coming. But not like this. Not from her. She had mocked my apartment, my car, my shoes. But mocking the man who helped me breathe again. That was something else. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this wasn't just a venue we'd booked. This hotel, with its golden sconces and polished oak floors, belonged to the man she just humiliated. Not just the janitor, the owner. I took a slow sip of water. My hand didn't shake, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I knew exactly what was about to happen next. And she had no idea. Would you have spoken up or let the truth reveal itself? Where are you listening from? Has anyone ever mistaken your worth like this? Of all the places to begin again, I didn't expect it to be in a supply closet. That's where I first met Michael. I was leading an HR seminar for faculty at a small hotel just outside Portland. The projector had gone dark mid-presentation, and I was crouched beside a tangled extension cord when he walked in. Button down rolled at the sleeves, toolbox in hand, and that quiet sort of presence that fills a room without saying much. "Need help?" he asked, his voice low, calm. I expected a contractor, maybe a technician on call. Not the man who'd change everything I thought I knew about power, about worth, about men. He fixed the outlet in less than 5 minutes. Offered me tea, peppermint, from the staff kitchen. And before he left, he pointed out a loose wire by the podium. "You'll want to tape that down. Wouldn't want anyone tripping." It should have been forgettable, but it wasn't. Because after my divorce, I didn't trust easily. Least of all kindness. My ex-husband, Ryan, had never yelled. His control came in quieter forms. The sighs when I bought new shoes. The silence when I got a promotion. The frozen stare when I spent a weekend with Lily instead of organizing his receipts. By the end, I was making excuses for his coldness. Telling myself all marriages fade. Telling my therapist I just needed to try harder. It took 3 years, 1 cracked rib, and Lily asking, "Why does Daddy only smile when you're not home?" For me to leave. And another 2 years before I stopped apologizing for doing it. Michael didn't ask questions. He showed up. Again and again. Fixed a jammed window in my apartment. Helped me unclog a drain. Brought Lily a sketchbook when she mentioned she liked to draw. He never talked about himself. Said he'd done the corporate thing. And preferred working with his hands. I believed him. I didn't care if he cleaned floors or ran Fortune 500 companies. I'd stopped measuring worth by titles. Stopped needing a man to be impressive, as long as he was decent. But my family, they hadn't. Especially Sabrina. To her, success came in stock options and Instagram-worthy milestones. Her house in Seattle looked like a design catalog. Her Christmas cards arrived on linen paper with gold foil names. At dinner once, she leaned over my plate and asked, "So, Is this new guy an artist? Or just between jobs? I laughed it off. But Lily saw the flicker in my eyes. He makes Mom laugh, she said, cutting her steak, so maybe that's a job too. God, I love that kid. Still, I didn't tell them much. Not because I was hiding him, but because I'd learned. Some truths aren't ready to be handed to people who only see labels. Michael met my mother once, during brunch. She complimented his cologne, asked how long he'd been in hospitality. He smiled. Long enough. And changed the subject. Later, he told me, their opinions don't scare me. But I don't owe them anything either. I nodded. Because part of me still hoped. If they saw how he treated me, they'd accept him. Turns out, they never really saw me either. Just the version they'd already written in their heads. And I was about to rewrite it, whether they liked it or not. The night we got engaged, there was no ring. Just rain tapping gently against the window, and the soft creak of my worn leather couch as Michael shifted to face me. I don't need a wedding, I told him. I've already done the white dress and the lie. He didn't flinch. Didn't try to convince me. Didn't promise anything glittery or loud. Instead, he pulled out a folded note. Handwritten. Simple. No grand speech. Just this. I'd like to build a life with you, however that looks. We held hands in silence. And I said yes. Not out of fairy tale giddiness, but because it felt like the most adult yes I'd ever said. Later, he slipped a silver bracelet onto my wrist. Not flashy, just warm, worn, engraved with the words, "One begin here." I didn't post it. Didn't tell Sabrina. Didn't even mention it in the family group chat. Some things feel safer when they're quiet. Some beginnings deserve to breathe before being judged. But the moment we set a wedding date, Sabrina called. Her voice was syrupy sweet at first, finally tying the knot again. How fun. Then sharper. Where's the venue? Don't say it's another courthouse. You know Mom would die. I told her we were hosting a small dinner at a boutique hotel near the river. Nothing fancy, just close friends and family. She snorted. A dinner. Elena, don't you want something worth remembering? I wanted peace. I wanted sincerity. She wanted optics. 2 days later, my cousin texted, "Hey, I thought your sister said the guy you're marrying works at the hotel." I didn't answer. Because yes, Michael did work there. And no, he wasn't the janitor. But also yes, he was in maintenance. He checked water pressure, oversaw linens, handled vendor issues. And that was exactly where he wanted to be. Because 5 years ago, when his father died, Michael stepped away from boardrooms and quarterly reports. He left the Hartley, Sloan corporate tower, the one with his last name etched in granite, and told no one. Let me earn their respect, he said. Not with money. With presence. So he started at the bottom. Literally. Cleaning spill stains, re-caulking bathtubs, learning every single system he might one day lead again. I once asked him why. He just smiled. The moment I forget what this work feels like, I stop deserving to lead the people doing it. How could I not love him? Still, I knew what was coming. Sabrina wouldn't see the man. She'd see the title. The uniform. The silence. She'd think I'd settled. She'd say I was repeating old patterns. And she'd weaponize it. Not because she hated me, but because she'd never learned how to love quietly. So we invited her, along with the rest of my extended family. Aunts who still called me the cautious one. Uncles who asked if I ever regretted leaving Ryan. Cousins who thought divorce was a failure, not survival. Let them come. Let them sit in linen-covered chairs, sip champagne poured by white, gloved servers, and assume whatever story they wanted. I didn't need to correct them. Because by the end of that night, their version of me, and of Michael, wouldn't survive the truth. Not under those chandeliers. Not in that hotel. And certainly not when the real owner stepped onto the stage. The sun was just beginning to dip when we arrived at the hotel. Not a grand entrance. Just the two of us, pulling up in Michael's old Lexus, the engine humming steady, quiet. Much like him, the valet opened my door and nodded with a smile. He didn't call Michael, sir, didn't rush. Just a polite, "Welcome, Miss Hartley." "Mr. Sloane." Michael adjusted the cuff of his shirt and helped me out. His hand was warm, anchored. "Ready?" he asked. I thought I was. Until we stepped into the lobby. Even though I'd seen it a dozen times, the space still stunned me. Gold-vined marble underfoot, arched ceilings with quiet uplighting. Floral arrangements too precise to be random. And Sabrina, already at the bar, flanked by two cousins, her glass tilted, lipstick perfect, voice carrying. She saw us, raised an eyebrow, then said to no one in particular, "Looks like the help's off duty." The words sliced before they reached me. One cousin laughed awkwardly. Another looked away. Michael didn't blink. He just leaned close and whispered, "Still want to do this?" I nodded. More for myself than for him. We greeted family, we smiled. We thanked guests for coming. But the air felt brittle. I overheard snippets. "Wait. He works here, right? Didn't she used to be married to someone in finance?" "Brave of her to try again." They said it kindly. Almost, but kindness doesn't erase condescension. Dinner was set in the West Wing. Dim sconces, cream linen, soft music. I took my seat beside Michael, my mother across from us. Sabrina one chair down, already swirling her wine. And then came the toast. Our aunt, well, meaning, sweet, slightly tipsy, stood up and tapped her glass. "To second chances," she began, "and to love that meets you where you are." Soft applause, some smiles. Sabrina rolled her eyes, then said, just loud enough, "I mean sure, it's romantic. But I wouldn't marry someone who cleans toilets." The table stilled. My mother's fork hovered in mid-air. Michael's hand was on mine. Steady, not tight. I looked at Sabrina. She didn't flinch. Didn't look drunk. Just smug. Like she'd said something brave. Something true. I didn't speak. Didn't call her out. But the weight of it settled across my chest. Thick. The room didn't gasp. There was no scandalized silence. Just an uncomfortable shifting of plates, and one quiet cough from the far end. Michael leaned toward me. "Want to leave?" I shook my head, because that would have given her power. And I'd spent enough of my life shrinking. Instead, I smiled. Lifted my glass. And said, "To clean toilets and clean hearts." Michael chuckled softly beside me. Only Lily clapped. She knew. She always knew. Sabrina. She just sipped her wine again, smiling into the rim of her glass like nothing had happened. Later, when dessert was served, she leaned toward me and whispered, "Look, I'm just trying to protect you. Don't be naive. Marriage isn't built on daydreams." I stared down at the chocolate torte on my plate. Perfectly layered. Bitter at the edges. "I'm not naive, Sabrina," I said calmly. "But you might be surprised by what real strength looks like." She blinked, confused, then turned to talk to someone else. Michael never brought it up. Not that night. Not later. But in the car on the way home, his voice was quiet. "She doesn't see you." I knew he meant it. Not as insult. As truth. And in that moment, I realized something painful. And freeing. She never had. She saw the Elena she preferred as predictable, cautious, the one who'd always let her shine louder. But not this version. Not the woman who rebuilt alone. Who chose a man without a title. Who didn't ask for permission anymore. And certainly not the woman who knew exactly what she deserved, and was willing to wait for it. I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream, or storm out, or shatter anything on the floor. But something did break. Not loudly. Not publicly. It broke in the way a thread snaps. Quiet, invisible, but irreversible. I undressed slowly, folded the bracelet Michael had given me into its velvet pouch, and placed it in the drawer by my bed. Then I sat. Still. For what felt like an hour. The house was quiet. Lily had gone to sleep at her friend's. Michael was in the shower. It should have been peaceful. But my chest ached. Not from what Sabrina said, but from what no one else did. Not one person spoke up. Not my mother. Not our aunts. Not the cousins who always called me the kind one. They sat and let it happen. Let me shrink. Let him be mocked. That silence was louder than her insult. It told me everything I'd tried not to believe. That I was alone in that room. I stared at my hands. The same hands that filled out FAFSA forms for Lily. The same hands that cut vegetables for Michael's lunch every morning. The same hands that had rebuilt my life. They didn't shake. But they didn't feel like mine either. I remembered something my therapist once told me. Shame isn't just what they give you. It's what you agree to hold. That night, I realized. I'd been holding far too much. Michael came out, towel around his shoulders, hair damp. He kissed my forehead gently, then sat beside me. She won't change, he said. I know. Do you need to say something to her? I shook my head. I think I need to say something to myself. He nodded, and didn't press. He always knew when to let me sit with things. The next morning, I brewed my tea, added a splash of almond milk, and watched the steam curl upward. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and dishwasher soap. The light was soft and orange. I opened my laptop and pulled up the family group chat. I didn't type anything. Just watched the dots blink as someone, Sabrina, probably, typed a follow-up message about how cute the venue was. I clicked out of it. Instead, I opened a blank email and began writing to myself. Not a journal. A promise. I will not shrink to make others feel large. I will not confuse politeness with peace. I will not explain love to people committed to misunderstanding it. I stared at the words, then hit save. Later that week, I ran into my mother at the grocery store. She looked tired. Her scarf was inside out. We both reached for the same jar of peanut butter. She smiled, faintly. You looked beautiful that night. I nodded. Thank you. Pause. I should have said something. Another pause. It's not too late, I said. She nodded. You're right. And for once, I believed she meant it. The shift wasn't dramatic. But it was real. The next Sunday, she invited Michael and Lily for lunch. She set the table with cloth napkins. Michael brought fresh rosemary bread. And for the first time in years, there was no comparison, no tension, no whisper of, is he good enough? There was just warmth. Still, I kept my guard. Not to punish, just to protect. Forgiveness, I was learning, didn't mean putting the sword back in their hands. It meant choosing not to carry it myself. I started noticing things after that. Not new things. Just things I'd been excusing for too long. How Sabrina always arrived late but expected applause. How my opinions only mattered when they matched hers. How in every family photo, she was centered. I was the space beside her. I remembered Christmas 3 years ago. Michael had made a pecan tart from scratch. She'd looked at it, smiled sweetly, and said, "Ah, rustic, I love that for you." At the time, I laughed it off. Even cut myself a slice. But that night, I cried in the pantry. Not over the tart, but because I realized I'd spent my entire life making myself small, so she wouldn't feel threatened. I was tired. Of folding myself into corners. Of being the one who didn't cause waves. Of being congratulated for being gracious, when what they really meant was silent. Michael never asked me to fight. But I knew if I wanted to live fully in this love, I had to stop living partially everywhere else. That Friday, I met my best friend Joanna for coffee. She slid a latte across the table and said, "So, that wedding toast." I raised an eyebrow. "You heard." She nodded. "Kim told me. And her mom told her. You know how this family operates." I sipped my drink. Hazelnut. Warm. Familiar. Then I looked her in the eye. "Do you think I made a mistake?" Joanna blinked. "No. But I do think you've been too generous for too long." That hit harder than I expected. I didn't want to lose them. I admitted. She tilted her head. "Elena, they lost you. Years ago. You just never stopped showing up." I stared down at the foam, swirling slowly, then nodded. Because deep down, I knew she was right. I wasn't mourning the version of family I had, I was mourning the one I kept hoping they'd become. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank notebook. No laptop. No emails, just paper and a blue ink pen. I made a list. Not of grievances, but of boundaries. I will not attend events where disrespect is laughed off. I will not accept apologies that are simply excuses in nicer clothing. I will love them from afar, if that's the only place I can do it safely. I didn't share it. Didn't post about it. Didn't even tell Michael, but something in me unlocked, and I slept. Deeply. Dreamlessly. When I woke up, the sun had already crept across the floorboards. Lily was humming in the next room. The dishwasher was running. I felt, not fixed. Not healed. But clear. I started with a folder. Not a symbolic one. An actual, physical folder. Dark green. One I'd bought at Target 3 years earlier, still had the tag inside. I labeled it, boundaries. Not plans. Not revenge. Just that. And I began printing. Notebooks. Receipts. Emails. Bank statements from the past year. I wasn't looking for dirt. Just clarity. Every time Sabrina offered to cover something, every time she said, "I got it," with that tone that meant, "You owe me gratitude." I made note, because I realized something. Her power wasn't money. It was the illusion that I needed hers. Michael never asked questions. But he saw the folder. He placed a blank USB beside it one night. Said nothing. Just kissed my cheek. I didn't tell him that I was also documenting conversations, subtle ones. A screenshot of Sabrina saying, "I'm just trying to help you not look poor." A text from our cousin. "Why does she always talk like you're her charity case?" I wasn't hoarding evidence to destroy her. I was collecting proof that I wasn't crazy. Because gaslighting doesn't always come from lovers. Sometimes, it comes in the form of, "I didn't mean it like that." Or, "You're too sensitive." Meanwhile, I was still living my life, still packing Lily's lunch, still going to work, smiling, nodding, writing performance reviews. But inside, I was shifting. I was no longer trying to fix the story. I was preparing to write my own ending. Joanna noticed. "You're quieter," she said one afternoon as we walked the aisles of Trader Joe's. "More still." I nodded. "Stillness is where I think." She laughed. "You're past the crying phase, huh?" I smiled. "No, I'm in the part where I stop asking for permission." At home, I rearranged drawers. Deleted old photos from shared albums. Unsubscribed from family threads. I didn't announce it. I didn't throw a fit. I simply stepped back. Because if they didn't see me fully, they didn't get to see me halfway either. Then came the invitation. Sabrina's voice memo popped up one Wednesday afternoon. I was mid-meeting. The preview said, "Big announcement, family brunch next Sunday. Dress cute." Cute. I pressed play that night. Her voice was breezy. "Hey all! We're doing a little brunch at Mom's. Nothing big, but I want to celebrate something with everyone. Yes, Michael and Elena. You're invited too. I heard it. The afterthought. The performance of inclusivity. I forwarded it to Joanna. She replied, "You know she's making it about her again, right?" I did. But I also knew I wouldn't miss it. Because sometimes silence isn't power, presence is. That Sunday I wore navy. Simple dress, clean lines, no jewelry, just the bracelet. Mu begin here. Michael wore gray, pressed shirt, polished boots. Lily brought her sketchbook. Always. We walked in together. The house smelled like lavender cleaner and roasted rosemary potatoes. Classic Sabrina. Curated domesticity. She greeted us with open arms. "Look at you guys! You clean up nice." I just smiled. "Thanks." "So do the rest of us." People milled. Passed fruit platters. Poured coffee. And then Sabrina called for attention. She stood at the head of the table, beside our mother. Held up a mimosa. "I just want to say how grateful I am for family," she began. "For second chances, and growing up, and learning from each other." I felt Michael's fingers graze mine beneath the table. She went on, "And I'm so glad we could all be here. Especially you, Elena. It's good to see you confident again. Really, even if we got here the long way." A few people chuckled. My mother looked at her lap. Then Sabrina leaned forward. "Maybe someday, we'll even get to hear Michael's story. You know, what he really does. We're all so curious." It was meant to be light, but it landed like a dare. A provocation dipped in civility. I stood, held my glass. "My story's mine to tell," I said. "And so is his, but not every table deserves the whole truth." Sabrina blinked. Someone whispered, "Whoa." I sat back down. The rest of brunch, a blur of clinking plates and quiet speculation. But I didn't care. Because I'd just taken something back. Not control. Not status. Dignity. Have you ever been expected to stay silent, just to keep the peace? What would you have done at that brunch table? It started with the email, not from Sabrina. From the hotel. One of the guest coordinators, Ali, had reached out to confirm a follow-up site visit for the Hartley Sloan executive team. I blinked. Not because of the name, but because it meant Michael had scheduled it and hadn't mentioned a word. He walked in while I was still staring at the screen. I turned the laptop toward him. He smiled. "I didn't want to assume you'd want to come." "Come to what?" He set his bag down. "The final walk through. I asked them to leave the ballroom open for the afternoon." I paused. "You're planning something?" He nodded. "But only if you're in." "What is it?" He sat beside me. "There's a donors' dinner next month. Press. Board members. City officials. I was going to make it just about the expansion project." A beat. But then I thought, maybe it's time they saw everything. "Saw what?" He didn't blink. "Yes." The silence sat between us like another person. And then I said it. "Let's do it." The next 3 weeks were quiet. But underneath, I was building something. Not a show. A statement. I called the photographer who'd done my college's graduation event last year. I booked a fitting with a seamstress, not a boutique. I asked Lily to design the menu place cards. Hand-drawn, in her style. "You sure?" she asked. "Is this a big deal?" I smiled. "It's not about big. It's about true." Michael made no announcements. Didn't tell Sabrina. Didn't even mention it in the usual family thread. But the city knew. Invitations went out under Rivera Hartley, Sloan events. Not to flaunt. To clarify. 2 weeks before the event, my mother called. "Your sister says there's some big hotel gala coming up. She wasn't invited." I sipped my tea. "That's correct." A pause. "You're not afraid she'll find out?" I laughed softly. "She's already decided who we are." Maybe it's time she saw who she got wrong. The night of the dinner, the ballroom glowed. Warm amber lights, candlelit tables, live strings. Guests arrived in tuxes, long gowns. Michael stood beside me. Gray suit, clean lines, no tie. He looked calm, but I could feel it in his breath. The quiet hum of something earned. Joanna arrived just before the program started. She squeezed my hand. "Remind me again," she whispered, "why we spent so many years letting them tell our story." I exhaled. No idea. At 7:40, Michael walked to the podium. The crowd hushed. A few cameras clicked. The mayor was in the front row. He cleared his throat. "I know many of you know my name, but you might not know the full story." He told them about starting at the bottom, about walking properties unannounced, about wanting to know how his hotels smelled at 5 a.m. when deliveries arrived. He didn't name, drop, didn't boast. But he said this: my greatest investment wasn't in square footage or returns. It was in the people who made me better. Like my wife, Elena. He turned to me. She taught me that love doesn't whisper about what it owns. It simply stands beside you when others walk away. The room was silent. Then applause, slow, rising, real. I felt my chest lift. Not with pride, with recognition. Afterward, people approached us in small waves. Executives, alumni, old colleagues. "You've changed the way I see leadership," one woman said. Another leaned close and added, "I hope your family knows what they almost missed." I didn't respond. Because that night wasn't about absence. It was about presence. At 9:13 p.m., Sabrina arrived. Late. Uninvited. Wearing red, she paused at the edge of the ballroom, scanning. Michael saw her first. His jaw tightened slightly. I placed my hand on his arm. "It's okay." She spotted us. Walked straight over. No smile. "Why wasn't I told?" she asked. Her tone wasn't angry. Just confused. Like she was waking up in a room she thought she'd owned. I looked at her fully. "Because it wasn't about you." A flicker. Then a shift. "But we're family." I nodded. "Yes. And family doesn't always get front row to your healing. Sometimes they only get to watch it happen." She didn't speak. Just looked around, at the guests, the lights, the warmth she hadn't been part of. Then she stepped back, understood, and walked away. No scene, no plea, just quiet departure. Michael exhaled beside me. "She's never done that before." I nodded. "Maybe it's the first time." She realized she wasn't the main character. The ballroom felt different that night. Not because of the lighting, though it was perfect. Not because of the music, though the cello warmed every corner. It felt different, because for the first time, I was standing in a space built to ignore women like me. And I wasn't hiding. Michael had invited key partners, board members, nonprofit directors. A gathering meant to honor the expansion of the Rivera Hartley, Sloan Group's community outreach division. But quietly, gently, we both knew it was more than that. This was the night I'd stop apologizing. Not with speeches, but with presence. Lily stood in the back of the room, sketching the florals. She'd arranged them herself. Dusty blue hydrangeas, soft greens, single ivory roses, understated. True. My mother sat in the third row. Not because I placed her there, but because she asked. "I don't want to be up front," she'd said. "Not tonight. I need to listen." That felt like healing. Joanna arrived early, pulled me aside in the hallway near the kitchen. "She's coming?" she whispered. I nodded. I figured. "She doesn't know, does she?" "No." I folded the hem of my sleeve once. "Let her find out like everyone else." The room was full. Every chair taken, servers gliding quietly between tables. Even the city councilwoman was seated. Michael stepped to the podium. No notes. No teleprompter. Just a calm face and a microphone. He thanked the community, the team, the people who built the buildings before the buildings were glamorous. He told stories of employees who rose from laundry staff to leadership, of nights he spent regrowing tiles, just to understand the weight of the work. And then, he said this: what we build is never about one name. But sometimes, one name reminds you what matters. He paused, then looked directly at me. Tonight, I want to acknowledge my partner, not just in title, but in soul. Elena Hartley Sloan. There was a beat, then applause. Louder than I expected. Warmer than I was ready for. I walked up. My heels didn't falter. My palms didn't sweat. I looked out at the room, then back at Michael. And I spoke. Thank you. Not just for welcoming me, but for seeing me. I didn't say more. I didn't need to. When I returned to my seat, my mother reached out, held my hand, just once. No words. It was enough. At 8:52 p.m. Sabrina arrived, late, of course. Dressed in red. She paused at the ballroom entrance, her heels clicking sharp against the polished wood. She scanned the room. Saw me. Saw the program in someone's hand. My name in bold under. K contributor. I watched the flicker in her eyes. She didn't wave. Didn't smile. She walked in slowly, settled in an empty seat near the back. For the first time in years, she wasn't the center of anything. I felt the power of that. Not with malice, but with certainty. The next moment came quietly. During the thank you speech from one of the nonprofit leaders, she said, "We're grateful to the Hartley Sloan team, but especially to Elena, who, without ever seeking credit, ensured this entire program had heart." A few heads turned. Some found Sabrina in the crowd, noticed her expression. Michael noticed too. He leaned toward me. "You okay?" I nodded. "More than okay." Later, during dessert, she approached. I was standing near the back table, looking over Lily's sketches on display. "Nice evening," she said softly. I turned to face her. "It is." She folded her arms. "I wasn't expecting this." "What were you expecting?" I asked. She hesitated. "Something smaller, simpler." I smiled. "I think that's what you always expected from me." Her lips parted. No defense, no sarcasm, just silence. Then, I didn't know who he really was. I met her gaze. "But you never asked." I assumed. "You decided." She nodded slowly. Hands now clasped in front of her, fidgeting. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because some truths deserve to unfold without explanation." She swallowed. I could see the effort it took her to hold back pride, and maybe shame. "I guess I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me. You owe yourself the truth." That landed hard, I saw it. In the way she looked down, then away. 10 minutes later, I watched her leave. Alone. No big scene. No glass of wine in hand. Just a woman walking out of a room she'd never truly entered. Cleanup was fast. The staff moved with quiet efficiency. I stayed behind. Walked the space one more time. Let the silence wash over me. The smell of citrus and lemon lingered in the air. Candles still flickered low. Eileen's sketches were being packed carefully into a flat box. Michael came up behind me, slid his arm around my waist. "Well," he whispered. "That happened." I leaned into him. "It did." We didn't say more. Because closure doesn't always require commentary. Sometimes, it just asks you to show up and not flinch. We didn't throw a party after that night. We didn't take a victory trip or open champagne. We went home. Michael changed into sweats. I hung up my dress, zipped the garment bag. Then I made tea, peppermint, 2 sugar cubes, almond milk, just like I always did. That night, we sat at the kitchen table in silence. Not awkward. Just still. The cat curled up on the windowsill. The dishwasher hummed. And for the first time in a long time, I looked around and thought, this is enough. This is mine. The next morning, sunlight stretched across our comforter. Lily was already sketching in the living room. Michael had left a sticky note on the fridge, ran to the bakery. Don't eat toast yet. I opened my laptop expecting work emails. Instead, I saw photos. Uploaded to the hotel's site under a new tab. Legacy and Community. There we were. Michael behind the podium. Me beside him, no captions trying to explain us. Just one simple line. Elena Hartley Sloan. Partner. Advocate. Builder. I stared at it longer than I needed to. Not because I doubted it, but because it had taken so long for someone else to say what I had already claimed. Lily came in, barefoot, pencil in hand. She looked at the screen. That picture, she said. You look like you run the place. I smiled. I do. She grinned. I knew it. Sabrina didn't call, didn't comment, didn't send a text masked as civility. And somehow, that silence was louder than any words she could have said. A week later, my mother stopped by. Unannounced. Holding a lemon pie she never used to make. She looked around our home slowly. At the photos on the walls, the blanket folded neatly on the couch, the lavender by the window. And she asked quietly, should I take off my shoes? I said yes. She sat at the table. Studied the picture of me and Michael in front of the new Rivera wing. She didn't say much. But before she left, she reached across the table. I didn't always understand, she said. But I'm proud of you. I see it now. And this time, I believed her. Michael built a small garden behind one of the boutique properties. Not on the expansion map. No press release. He planted rosemary, lavender, mint. He installed a bench facing west. When it was finished, he brought me there on a Sunday. This is for the days we don't need to be seen, he said, just to be still. We sat for an hour. No words. The sun moved. And everything felt exactly right. In April, I gave a talk at a local summit for women in education. Resilience through reinvention. I didn't mention names. Didn't retell betrayals. Didn't point fingers. I said, sometimes, the most radical thing a woman can do is stay. Stay kind. Stay steady. Stay present in a world that tries to make her disappear. 3 women cried. One said, you reminded me that silence isn't weakness. It's wisdom that chooses when to speak. Lily got accepted to 3 schools. She taped the letters above her desk, next to a quote card. Legacy is what you leave and how you lived, not what you earned. She told me she wanted to study architecture. I want to build spaces that feel like safety. I looked at her, that calm power in her posture, and thought, you already are. Joanna and I started a small circle Quiet Women Rise. 12 of us, widows, late bloomers, divorced and rebuilding. We met once a month, shared tools, shared silence. One evening I asked, what have you reclaimed? I wrote in my notebook, my voice, my worth, my place at the table. Then came the letter. Handwritten. From my father's cousin, Ellen in Denver. I hadn't seen her in 20 years. But the letter felt like she'd watched every step. Elena, I was the quiet one too. Always a shadow behind a sister who took up every room. I never spoke up. You did. You gave me hope I never thought I'd feel at 67. Thank you. For being louder in your silence than most are with a microphone. I held the letter in both hands, breath stilled. Then I placed it inside a photo frame that held no photo. Not everything we carry needs to be seen. 2 weeks later, I returned to the hotel alone. No appointment. No press. The concierge nodded when I walked in. Back to see your ballroom. I smiled. Yes. I passed the cafe. Smelled lemon scones and espresso. Walked past the Rivera portrait. The ballroom doors were open. Empty. Dim. I stepped in. The scent of citrus and old applause hung faint in the air. I walked to the center of the room. Stood still. Closed my eyes. I could still feel her. Sabrina. At the edge of that space. Stunned. Silent. I didn't come to remember her. I came to remember me, because this was the room where I stopped explaining. Stopped defending. Stopped shrinking. I stood there, alone, and realized, this is what legacy feels like. A quiet echo that no one can take. I left without looking back. A few nights later, after Lily went to bed and Michael had fallen asleep with a book on his chest, I sat at the kitchen table. The same table where I once cried into tea, where I once Googled how to be stronger without breaking. I pulled out a blank card. No lines. Just space. And I wrote. To the woman I was at 35. I know you're scared. I know you keep folding yourself to fit spaces that were never built for you. I know you mistake silence for peace and kindness for weakness. But I need you to hold on. Because one day, you won't beg to be seen. You'll stand still, and they will have no choice but to face your light. You'll walk into the rooms that once shrank you, and own them, not with noise, but with knowing. And you'll raise a daughter who sees you not as broken, but as brave. I love you. Not for who you become, but for who you kept choosing to be, even when no one clapped. I folded the card. Tucked it into a book I once used to hide under my pillow, a battered copy of The Gifts of Imperfection. Then I slid the book onto the shelf, not to forget her, but to finally set her down. The next afternoon, I walked out to the back garden. The rosemary had taken root. Lavender hummed with bees. I brought out one of the wooden dining chairs. Not for guests. I placed it beneath the tree, faced it toward the west, and I left it there. For her. For me. For the girl who kept showing up long before anyone invited her. I didn't cry. Didn't bow my head. Just stood beside the empty chair and whispered, "Thank you for surviving long enough to get me here." Then I went back inside. And lived. If you've ever rebuilt yourself quietly, tell me below. If someone once mocked your worth, and you chose not to prove it, but to live it, your story belongs here. You are not alone. Every ending can be a new beginning. Subscribe to EN Reddit Story for more real stories of quiet justice, healing, and empowerment.